Hello, this is a video recording, part of the virtual moot sessions for the Pagan Federation. The theme we've been given as presenters this time is relationships, and the angle I want to take is looking at relationships between us as humans and things that are not human. Animals, plants, geographic features and so forth. I'd like to touch a little bit on relationships with spirits, but I understand some other person is contributing more on that, so I'll leave that to them primarily. In terms of what makes a life well lived a good life, the Greeks were of the opinion, which I share, that a life with awareness, with self-reflection, with consideration, contemplation and so forth is a life enhanced. In fact, they argued, many of the Greek philosophers, that people who hardly think at all about themselves or their own life, where they're going, what they're doing, why they're doing it, well, the Greeks were of the opinion they might as well not be alive in the first place, because they had all of the sort of sentience and spiritual acuity of a slug. That to one side. I'd also argue that in addition to needing to think about our life, to be aware of ourselves and where we're going in this world, another central key feature to a life of depth, a life of quality, a life of meaning, and part of it goes hand in glove with the need to think about our lives, is that our life should be one in which compassion and love and concern are centre stage, which means we've got to think about what is the compassionate thing to do. I am, well, to put it in Jungian terms, I'm overly focused on the sort of the air thinking aspects of reality. So I imagine perhaps a lot of you, as those who come at it more from a water emotional feeling slant, would argue that they don't need to think about it, they just intuit what is compassionate and go with their feelings on that one, which I can grasp as a concept to an extent, but sometimes knowing what the right thing to do is not necessarily mere intuition. It requires a degree of thought and weighing up several possible options before deciding which way you go. So I think perhaps it's something that requires a combination of both thinking and feeling functions in order to know how to adjust to other people. But perhaps particularly where the people we are accommodating, we are expressing concern and love for, are not human. We can struggle enough to make ourselves understood to other human beings and for them to make themselves understood to us, and not just in the obvious cases of a language barrier because they only speak Dutch or Arabic or Japanese or something and we don't speak those languages, but in cases where just getting our feelings across become difficult. Understanding what they want is difficult. If you are trying to communicate with a creature that not only doesn't speak your own human language, but doesn't have your human body language, where its way of communicating is very different from the human way of communicating, then knowing how to approach that creature, how to establish good relationships with it, how to understand its needs, its hopes, its fears, its anxieties, its happiness, is not just a straightforward matter of emotionally gushing all over the place, nor is it a straightforward matter of clinical observation. It's got to be a combination of both emotional openness to that being, but also sitting back, watching, understanding, learning, researching, studying, establishing a groundwork of communication with another living being, one that doesn't communicate verbally, or at least not in a language we speak at any rate. Within various forms of paganism, the different forms of witchcraft, for example, are perhaps a very obvious one. There are long traditions of working with familiars, with animals, guides and helpers and assistants. A number of shamanic traditions, different traditions from different parts of the world, also have the idea of working alongside an intimate animal relationship, one that's more not simply there as a servant to fetch and carry, but is a friend, is a companion, is an integral part of life. And that notion of the companion animal, whether that's a dog or a cat or a frog or a bird or whatever it might be, is an idea worth exploring, because we are becoming more and more aware through endless videos on social media and this sort of thing, that not only can humans have all sorts of unexpected relationships. You see people who have befriended quite dangerous wild animals who have clearly established an affectionate relationship with a lion or a tiger or a bear or a wolf. But also we're becoming more aware that animals of different species can interrelate to each other. And you can see affection developing between not just creatures within a species, but creatures across species barriers, in which humans aren't the activating force behind that relationship. So as someone who, well, I used to have cats and dogs at the same time, now I've only got dogs. But a relationship develops between the cats and dogs, but only because I put them together in the same house. We're also starting to see spontaneous, or becoming aware, shall we say, of spontaneous relationships developing outside human influence between various different creatures. And that's something I think is vitally important to us, partly because it reminds us we are not the end-all and be-all of existence on planet Earth, that lots of things happen without us needing to be around. But also because it shows that those sorts of spontaneous affections between living beings are not simply something that humans impose. I've encountered people with very negative views of pet ownership who see it as a form of domination and enslavement in very sort of melodramatic terms. It need not be. I mean, undoubtedly there are people who suffocate their pets under a layer of cloying affection and treat them in a way that's very unhealthy for those pets, feeding them on very unhealthy diets and so on, perhaps as a means of satisfying their own emotional void and inappropriately relating to that animal. But you can have equally a very positive, very constructive interrelationship with another creature. And it brings something into life. It's not, again, something you often hear said. People say, well, you know, so-and-so is very lonely, they don't have a partner, or they don't have children, and therefore the dog, the cat, the whatever it might be, is a substitute for a human relationship. And I don't doubt that there are people in the world who do struggle to make human relationships, and therefore end up pouring huge amounts of affection onto a small furry thing that possibly would like to have a bit more personal space away from the human being, who knows. But you can have very fulfilling relationships with humans and still have a very deep bond with other non-human creatures. There's a lot to learn from other creatures: compassion, tenderness, friendship, humour. Anyone who's ever owned a dog must recognise that dogs have a tremendous sense of humour. All sorts of creatures engage in ways of thought, some of which are very familiar to us and some of which are very challenging and unusual to us, and require us to expand our minds to understand how other parts of the world work, how other manifestations of the life force express themselves. And it helps us as human beings to grow, as well as being able to nurture another living being, to give it joy, to give it happiness, to give it safety and security, and so forth. So for me, that can be a very deeply rewarding experience. And it's something anyone of any religious background or no religion whatsoever can establish. But I think perhaps as pagans, because we have an idea working within the various different branches and denominations of paganism that other beings have souls, have consciousness, have awareness. We are starting perhaps from a different point than some people in some other religions and non-religions begin from when they're attempting to relate to the non-human. In addition to that, I think you can also have quite fulfilling relationships outside the animal realms. I'm not suggesting necessarily anything as bizarre as relating to a daffodil or a tulip, unless that floats your boat, fair enough. But trees, perhaps we have a singularly unique relationship to, in that trees, because of their sheer size, the stereotypical image of pagans as tree huggers, you can physically embrace a tree in a way that you can't really go and hug a bluebell, not without squashing it flat in the process. Which isn't to say people cannot. There are devoted orchid growers and so on who are clearly deeply enamoured of much smaller scale plants, and there are mycologists in the world who will remind us that although mushrooms and toadstools are not plants, they're in a whole different category. They are possibly the biggest living organism on this planet. There's a honey mushroom in America that's something in the region of 2.5 miles from one side to the other, and it's a single living entity with 1,000,001 little mushrooms dotted all over that land area, all of which are connected. So you could go and hug a mushroom, perhaps in that way. A lot of trees, birch trees live roughly the same period of time as a human being. Other trees live much, much, much longer than a human being. And just sitting under the shade of them, feeling the trunk against your back, paying regular visits to trees, whether it's at the bottom of the garden or some local woodland where you can walk to, you can establish a sense of empathy with the tree. Coming at it from a pagan point of view, particularly Druid point of view, I feel that trees are thinking entities. I know they have no brain, but I suspect one day, decades or possibly centuries into the future, botany will discover a mechanism which will be the plant equivalent to a brain. They'll establish some understanding of how plant intelligence works. We're already beginning to understand that trees communicate with each other by releasing pheromones and so forth. There is research showing trees will nurture one another by giving sugars and other nutrients. Even if they're in short supply, they'll give some of their own supply to weaker trees, even sometimes keeping stumpy trees alive, where the tree has been chopped down or whatever and isn't a full-grown tree, but is being kept alive by the other trees growing around it, which is suggestive of awareness, it's suggestive of compassion, it's suggestive of interaction between the plant world. Trees will release pheromones to warn other trees if there is a hostile insect infestation, that sort of thing. And I think those trees can not only communicate with each other, but sometimes subtly, gently, they can communicate with humans. Possibly they can communicate with all sorts of other creatures too. Maybe the badgers living in the roots and the squirrels scurrying up and down the branches and the various birds nesting up in the canopy. Maybe they have some degree of communication with the tree too. And perhaps by entering into that symbiotic network of all of these living interactive beings that communicate with each other, although we're not living in the branches of the tree, we're only visiting for a short period of time, we can begin to establish a relationship. We can admire the beauty of the tree. We can share emotionally with the tree. And it can bring a sense of peace. It can bring a sense of artistic inspiration, of poetic vision, of understanding maybe what the tree needs in terms of its health needs and things of that sort. Therefore, a relationship can be built up there. And it's emotionally enhancing in a different way from the kind of emotional bonding you can form with an animal or with another human being. Beyond that, at a bigger scale, we can relate to landscape. We can be inspired, uplifted, terrified. We can have an emotional reaction to mountains, to forests, to seashores, to cave systems, to all manner of different landscapes, and perhaps through regular visitation to particular landscapes. That particular river, that rock formation, that marshy area, that cave system, whatever it might be, that we are able to regularly visit, we develop a means to admire, contribute towards, be inspired by, exchange gifts with. You could argue in an artistic kind of a way, fall in love with a landscape. And maybe, when we're dead, perhaps some relative, following our last wishes, might scatter our ashes in that landscape, so we come to bond with it in a very cellular, very material way. We become part of that decomposing mass that feeds into the landscape. So we can develop these sorts of relationships with everything from an individual tree or an individual cat or dog or horse or whatever it might be, all the way up to entire landscapes. And to do so, I think, is a very positive thing. Environmental psychology is still very much in its early days, although, if we're being honest, psychology per se is still very much in its early days compared to sciences like chemistry and metallurgy that have been knocking around a far, far longer time. But environmental psychology is particularly young, and a lot of it focuses on abstract things that are not particularly relevant to what we're talking about here. But there is that sense of place identity that humans can come to by falling in love, by identifying with a place, somewhere they've spent a lot of time, many years, either living there or going on regular holidays to it or what have you. So strongly identify with the place that they want to look after it, to preserve it, to nurture it, to know the story of it. So if that place becomes threatened, some supermarket or a housing estate or a road wants to plough straight through it, and it's going to be destroyed, we feel sufficiently bonded to that landscape that we will defend it and protect it and campaign on its behalf. A landscape that is unloved will not get any humans campaigning for it. If there's no one that has bonded to it, it will just be ploughed under by the next element of progress, or whatever you want to call it, that comes in and concretes over the place. So there is a knock-on benefit in that way. In the same sense, if as a human you've formed a particular affection for an individual animal, that can gradually expand to a sort of a species-wide affection for that animal or plant, as the case may be, such that because I love my dogs, I donate to dog welfare charities and dog shelters and things like that. So it's not just my dogs I'm looking after, it's dogs in general. I have a particular passion for wolves, and I have done for decades and decades now. I go and visit the wolf sanctuary down in Reading and walk with wolves on a yearly basis, and I raise money for them. I've donated quite a lot over the years. I want to help educate people about wolves so that they're not frightened of them or intimidated by them, and although it's highly unlikely we will reintroduce wolves into Britain in any time in the near future, what I can do to try and campaign on behalf of wolves in other countries where they're still wild and free to block hunting campaigns to eradicate wolves, which still flare up in all sorts of places. America at the moment is particularly bad for this. I want to do my bit, not just for the individual wolves I've met at the sanctuary in Reading, but wolves worldwide, because that affection, that relationship has established, and with relationship comes mutuality and responsibility. Not only am I inspired by the experiences I've had with wolves or with my dogs, but I want to give something back. I can do it very directly with my dogs, feeding them, walking them, petting them, etc. But I can also do it in a much more broad sense of giving back to the whole species. So it's worth reflecting that emotional relationship can exist in a very practical way, in that it leads to transformation, it leads to action, it leads to us doing something about it. I said at the start I'd include a little bit about spirit, even though there's another presenter talking about that in more depth. I class myself as a polytheist, but for me animism and polytheism are fundamentally the same thing. It's just that one has bigger scale spirits than the other one does, at least in my book. That's how I think about it. So for me, the idea of spirits within landscapes, spirits within trees, spirits of animals, both individual spirits of animals that the spirits of various dead pets and so forth, but also the idea that whole species have a protective guardian entity, a godlike presence or goddess-like presence. Whether or not it's truly a god, I think, is almost an irrelevant point. It's a presence which watches over and guards. We can interact with the things we love ritualistically, as well as going and hugging the tree. You can perform a ceremony under the tree, as well as taking my dogs for a walk. I can perform and take part in ceremonies to honour the spirits of dogs generally. There's a wonderful Hindu festival that takes place in November that is a day devoted to dogs and recognising all of the good things that dogs have given to humanity. I can take part in festivals to honour the wolf. There is a Roman festival that takes place in February, the Lupercalia, which honours the spirit of wolves everywhere. Those rituals can be shaped through song, through music, through story, through poetry, through meditation, through the making of offerings, through sitting and communing and mentally merging with the guardian deity or spirit or whatever you want to describe it as being of the particular animal or the tree or the landscape that you're trying to communicate with. And regardless of whether you're a druid or a heathen or a Wiccan or a Kemetic or a Hellenic or what you might be, you can work into your ritual calendar days in which you honour the places, the plant life, the animal life that is deeply meaningful to you and transforms and enhances your life. And maybe even thinking about that in different ways. If you're an omnivore and you eat a great deal of beef, that's your favourite meat or something, honouring the spirit of the cow and thinking about bovine welfare and all of the things that you benefit from in your life from cows. Even if you're vegetarian, perhaps your favourite thing is corn, bread, flour, and thinking about plants that you eat a great deal of and how they've been cultivated and spread across the world, maybe to a far wider vista of the world than ever they would have grown in naturally thousands and thousands of years ago, because humans have so liked that plant, they've taken it and spread it and spread it. And of course a lot of plants not only can you consume as dinner, as food, but consume medicinally. You can have them with flowers for fragrances in the home, making essential oils, 101 different uses of particular forms of plant, and thinking about things you make a great deal of use of in your life, even if you're not conscious of loving them in a sort of tree-hugging fashion. Just the fact that, let's say, something like tea, I don't go around hugging camellia bushes and hugging tea plants, but I guzzle tea till it comes out of my ears. So thinking about the significance the tea plant has in my life, how it's impacted on the world economy, how people have made fortunes growing tea and other people have been exploited into borderline slavery, picking tea, and all of the ways that tea impacts on my life and other people's lives is a chance to sit, not only to think about global issues, ethical issues, philosophical issues, economic issues, but ritually to sit and commune with the spirit of the tea plant. I went to a talk years and years ago given by the author Graham Harvey, who writes a lot of things on animism and shamanism and so on. And he was talking about an experience he had of interacting with the spirit of a particular type of mushroom, oddly enough, and how that spirit in a trance state had communicated with him and spoken to him. That's something we could do with the spirit of the tea plant, the spirit of the coffee bean, the spirit of the oak tree whose beams have helped to build this house, I imagine, because it's quite an old house. For the spirits of sheep, if you're sitting down to eat a lot of lamb chops, especially with Easter coming up around the corner. All sorts of ways in which plants and animals and landscapes interact with our lives, benefit our lives, enhance our lives. Perhaps in ways we don't immediately think of, but sitting, thinking, taking time out, reflecting on what is actually important to us, what we would not like, what plants and animals and landscapes we would not like to live without, how that's impacted on our lives, on the big wide world, and how maybe we can incorporate that into a spiritual dimension through ritual, through ceremony, through meditation, through metaphysical work, communicating with the spirits of those plants and animals to find out what they want, how they see their relationship to us, what we can give back for gratitude for all of the things that they've given to us. It's just an idea, but something to contemplate on, and you don't necessarily need to go terribly fast, but you're not desperately mobile in order to engage with some spirits of plants and animals. It's always nice if you can go to a place where they are, but you can also attempt to communicate with those spirits even if you're not able to go far from your own home. You communicate with the spirit of the tea plant, brew up a pot, have a few cups, sit, meditate, see what it says to you. Maybe let us know in feedback. Okay, take care. Thank you.